Okay, so today I'm really excited to be able to present this. This is a dream of mine. My cousin and I are working on a book about drama, and some of the elements that we're going to talk about today are part of that process of what people move through when they are experiencing drama. So I'm going to pull up my slides now and talk about, how drama fits into corporate life. I feel like we're all experiencing the challenge of working with people when they have the emotional hit that comes from drama as they are experiencing it. So let me pull up the slides and start with, come on, there we go. So what's our why? Why are we doing this? Okay, so Global IOC is building into a network, the Global Coaching Network, so that people can come together and share with one another what's going on from a research perspective. I was just talking with my colleague Annie in Wales today. And so thinking about what's going on in research, what's going on in practice, and how can we intertwine both worlds, and what does that look like? So our why is to help you sharpen your saw. What does it look like when you're coaching to this topic? What does it look like when you are successful with coaching to this topic? And what does the go forward look like for you? So it's sharpening your saw. Know you can always reach out to folks at Global IOC as well as folks that are in other organizations, because we're building a collaborative called the Global Coaching Network, which all of our webinars will move to in the fall. But right now, they're still going to be housed under Global IOC. But it's tools and resources so that you can be the best coach that you want to be, and how you can put this in your toolkit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on screen. Okay, so early models. The early models for drama, back to 68, a person named Kaplan said the model for drama is that we have a persecutor, we have a victim, and we have a rescuer. What does that give you as a coach? What can you do with that as a coach? Very little, because it's not talking about what the process of drama is, what's going on for the person, how to help them intervene, how to think about what is the best way to help a client who is in a drama cycle. So my cousin and I came up with an idea, a model for what does it look like when people are engaging in drama. So number one, the start of drama is a thought, an experience, or an event. The hardest part about understanding drama, emotional drama rather, so let's call it emotional drama, since the Oscars are this week on Sunday, but emotional drama is, it can start with a thought. And think about how many thoughts we have every day and how things can be running through our mind. It doesn't have to be experience, it doesn't have to be an event, but it can be. It can be an experience, it could be an event, but that's how it starts. And then what happens next is we go through a cognitive process of making meaning. So what is the meaning? So if somebody walks by your desk and they don't say hello, or while they're walking by, they're huffing or they're sighing, what is going on? So we make things up. We make meaning cognitively about what's going on. And then we have an emotional hit. And if the meaning made was less than positive, negative, the emotional hit probably is on the negative side of emotions. And we're worried, or we're concerned, or we're angry, or we're frustrated. Something's going on in our emotional state. So it creates an emotional hit for us. And as we have an emotional hit, we need to tell the story about it. So what is the story about the thought, the experience, or the event, based on the meaning we made, the emotions we're feeling, and the story we now create? So what happens at this point is, if we can sit with the story, we keep it to ourselves. But what's happening for people is the emotions are so big they have to find someone to talk to. So now we go back to the early model, which is we find someone to share it with, and we become the victim. The person we talk to becomes our rescuer, and then the person that created the thought, experience, or event becomes the persecutor. So now we have a model inside a model that helps us think about what do we want to do next, and what does that look like in terms of doing something next. So let's talk about the event, the experience, or the thought. So we are programmed for negativity bias. Those of you that have been in my class, you've seen this slide before. We're programmed to think negatively before we think about, okay, is that really true? Is that what's happening? And it's really interesting because so many researchers and so many scholars say that our brains go back to the caveman days, where if we didn't think something was bad, there's a chance that we were going to be eaten. So it was a survival mechanism to look at what's wrong before we look at what's right. So we're still doing that. And what happens is the amygdala, which is our emotional center, is activated by this negative event, and it gets bigger, and it calls for adrenaline, and it calls for cortisol, and it starts feeding into our body. And so now we have all these yucky chemicals. They are chemicals running through our body, and it's shrinking our hippocampus. So the part of our brain that we need to be the fact checker, it goes silent, and the emotions are what take over. And so we eliminate our ability to be able to function in a fact-checking way. We can't fact check ourselves because our emotions are running crazy. We're going to talk about intervention, but first we're going to define the model in terms of we are programmed to do this. When I talk with people, I say that our emotions and our experience of what's going on goes down what I call neural pathways in the brain. And the more the neural pathway is ignited, the bigger the neural pathway becomes. So a lot of times what we say to people is we want them to take one thought and replace the thought and act like it's a one for one. But it's not a one for one. It is when we think about it, it's every time it goes down the neural pathway, it gets strengthened. So the more negative we are, the more memory, the more reminders in the memory that are negative, the more strengthened it becomes. So how do we make that? How do we do with that change? It's not just one for one. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about intervening. So the cognitive appraisal that's happening, and most of the time it's automatic. We don't even realize we're doing it. So we have an experience and we're catastrophizing. It's the worst thing that could happen. We have a flat tire on the way to work if we're still driving to work. We have a flat tire and we think, I'm going to be late for a meeting. When I'm late for the meeting, I'm going to miss out on information. When I miss out on information, it's going to create this havoc in my life. And so we get into catastrophizing. Or we move into black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is very rigid, and it's one way or the other. And sometimes it becomes very judgmental. And so when we move into judgment, then we are experiencing some of that in terms of it's right or wrong, and it's wrong. And so now something's wrong, and now we start to ruminate about it. Or we overgeneralize. That person always does such and such, and that always behavior is a problem for us. We personalize it. Somebody did this to us personally. They're out, they've targeted me, they are after me. Mind reading consists of, I know what they're thinking, so they're thinking this or thinking that. Selective attention is paying attention to the things that we want to pay attention to and ignoring what's really going on. And it's a little bit like confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is seeking out information and people who will agree with us in terms of what's going on in our lives. And so we go through these 4 to 7 areas when we have that appraisal of what's going on, which then leads us into how we make meaning about it. Any questions on cognitive appraisal? The thought, the experience, or the event creates an opportunity for us to make a cognitive appraisal. Our brains are wired to think what's wrong before it's what's right. So how do we think in terms of next steps? Well, the next steps are, what's the meaning we make? So I'm a big fan of Reichard Stelter, who talks about generation coaching. And one of the things he talks about in this space is how people make meaning. Okay. Things become meaningful when we understand how we feel, how we think, and how we act. That's the basis for meaning making. Then we tell stories based upon those feelings, thoughts, and actions, which we're going to talk about in after your breakout, the storytelling. And it's based on previous experiences and expectation for what is supposed to happen in the future. So what's happening now and how is this impacting our future is pretty much how we move into that meaning-making process. So the opportunity is to integrate the past and the present for what ideas can help us in solicit different meanings out of our consciousness for what it could really mean instead of what we want to assign as a meaning. It builds links to practice, habits, and routines. I want to go back to saying the way we make meaning about something is probably going to be consistent unless we're able to shift a belief about the meaning we're making. Meaning making invites us to see the world differently. When we are trying to shift somebody's belief in terms of what's going on and reality wise, what's going on relationship wise, what's going on with different cultures. So let's talk about the culture versus situational. So many times the meanings we are making are part of our culture, our identity, our values, our beliefs. Many of us are making meanings the same way our families made meanings, the same way our interactions with colleagues make meanings. And again, when I think about that confirmation bias, we come back together to look at things in much the same way. So we have that global meaning that can have an impact on how we define what is happening. But we also have the situational meaning. And I think this is what happens more often in a workplace context, is that there is a discrepancy between the value, the belief, or the expectation I have, say for my leader, and the individual, which then is followed by a judgment, because there's a gap between what I want to happen and what is happening. And that's the meaning I'm making. Why is this person doing that thing? Why is this event happening? Why is the organization making this decision? So there's a discrepancy between what I think should be happening and what is happening that then leads to that emotional reaction. So when I'm talking about this, I want you to think about it's big. It's not small, it's big how people make meaning. We can intervene as coaches, but we have to remember that everybody makes meaning differently. If we say just the global meanings have such an impact on how people make meaning, and then we come down to the situational meaning, we see how big it gets and how we have to help the client or the team member or the associate to really go down and say, when did I start making this meaning? And now what do I want to do with it? Is this the meaning I want to assign to that event? It's so often when we check with our clients or our team members about the meaning they're making and where it came from, it's going to have a real past trail. It's not just yesterday. It's not just last week. It's not just last year. It's going to have a pretty long trail that we're going to be working with them on. Questions on meaning making? Okay, you can always raise your hand. or you can speak to me too. That's permissible. So, okay, now we've had the thought, the experience, the event, and now we have an emotional hit. Oh my God, now I'm feeling something. Okay, so what am I feeling? We get hooked. This comes from Susan David's work in that there's this constant cineplex inside our heads. I would say it's our neural pathways activated. Okay, this happened before, it's happening again, and now I'm really frustrated by it, really angry by it, angry because of it. And so then when we're getting hooked, that cineplex, those neural pathways are sending all kinds of self-defeating emotions and thoughts and behaviors down those pathways. And as a result, the narratives, the stories we tell ourselves have to organize what's happening. So now we're building the story, the emotions, building the story. And the narrative stays in our head because the neural pathways have now just been lit up. So the story we're telling gets a little bit bigger, gets a little bit intense. And in that story, there's a conflict between the stories we tell and the world we want to live in. Now we're talking about the gap between our expectations for the world and what's really happening. And so we're really frustrated because we don't have the world the way we want it to be. And so our storyteller, which by the way is us, is biased, confused, deceptive, and based on how we're making meaning about the events in our life. And daily encounters increase hookedness. Okay, that's a word. Susan David made it up. It's a word, hookedness. Hookedness means we're continually hooked by what's happening to us. And so we get what David Richo calls triggers. So the trigger is happening and now we're hooked. Okay, we don't have a gap in the intensity of it's happening, boom, it's immediate. And then we have chatter going on in our heads, and chatter is exhausting. And we all know this with the monkey mindedness, the thought blaming, the outgrown ideas, and just our self-righteousness about the way the world should be. So the formula: internal chatterbox going ba 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 ba, adding color based on the event. Maybe it's a new event, but it's the same kind of what's criticism. So I have this way of looking at it in terms of buckets we have in our brain. So we have a bucket for criticism. We have a bucket for abandonment. We have a bucket for power over, abuse of power. And when anything goes in that feels similar to that, we get that blending together and an emotional punch. So that's in the blue bucket. Okay, it's self-talk. It's I'm not enough. You know, the messages we have about ourselves, it creates that punch. So again, I started talking about the 4 common hooks. We blame ourselves for thinking that way. Monkey mindedness is when our brain just goes from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And I think monkey mindedness can add to our buckets. The outgrown ideas of our culture and the meaning our culture makes, is that the same meaning I want to make? The way our family made meaning about that, do I want to make meaning about that? The way our husband, our spouses, our colleagues make meaning, do we think the same way? And then do we just want to be right? I used to ask my students if they wanted to be right or happy, because sometimes we can't be both. So am I just wanting to be righteous about my beliefs, or, you know, am I just sticking to them because they are my beliefs? So I just gave you the three phases that as we start through the model, which is talk about the event, talk about the meaning we make, or talk about the emotional hit. So I want you to go into breakout groups, and I want you to talk about either a current or past instance of drama in your life produced by someone else. Not you're doing the drama, but somebody else is doing the drama. Talk a little bit about what the circumstances, you know, what was done to resolve it, how often does it occur? And my favorite coaching question, well, one of my many favorites, is if you had a magic wand, how would you change the situation with what's going on? And we're going to compare how you would change the situation to the intervention. So I'm gonna stop the recording while you're in your breakout. Okay. So who wants to share? What'd you talk about?
Well, I can share. If so, I think like I'm from Ukraine. Marilena knows me, so Marilena knows. Currently I'm in Ukraine, and I think all the I think the biggest drama of all the times everyone knows about. So I'm not gonna talk about that. But I'm gonna talk that I have some personal dramas with my ex-boyfriend. We are still in contact as a friends. We used to be like we are just but he is like sometimes very dramatic, and all of the people who like we have some mutual friends. We have two friends in common, and they are saying that he's a bit dramatic, but he has a lot of drama. But currently, like he lied to me, and then I found out the truth, but it wasn't that he said to me, but it was like a drama. Like it was the truth that I got to know from other people. So when I said to him, like, look, I know the truth, tell me the truth because I know it, but I want to hear it from you. He started to say like he said no, I don't want to talk, like no, I don't want to talk to you, and he just blocked me on all social media, and the messengers. So but I still, like, I was talking recently with one of his friends, and we were just came out to the conclusion that in any case we're gonna talk with him after his work. But I understand that for me is now the priority is my peace, because the drama that the person gave me, it just set me up with this because my mental health is not like very good because of the situation happening, because most of the nights I just don't sleep, and but and this one gonna be one of the hardest talk for me, because before this I should understand whether I want this person to be in my life, because whether he is willing to change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that is, how we can, the drama, it comes with a story. And then we have to decide whether we're going to be part of that story or not. That's our decision point. Is this the story I want to live into? And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can work with stories. So thank you for sharing. Other
But I have a question. But do people change? But like the people who make this drama, do they have ability to change and stop bringing the drama in? This
Okay,
is like the
as a
question.
coach, as a coach, I believe that anybody can change at any moment in time, given they have the desire, given that they have a plan, given that they take action and they stay actionable with the action. The challenge is when we start talking about emotional drama, we really have to remember how it is wired into the brain, and that we have to be vigilant on awareness of when it's showing up for us, when we're showing up as victims, when we're trying to, entice people into our confirmation bias about the stories we're telling. We have to be able to move through it. So you can't want somebody to change to be happy. The person who is changing has to make that decision on their own. So I think that's a really good point.
Mm.
So one more, share with me what your group talked about.
Elena, do you want to share your story? Because it was a really good one.
Yes, I'd like to share my story, but mine is not, it's not super dramatic, like we said before in the group. It's like little everyday drama, I think, that everybody experiences because my family businesses, we work in property management. So, and naturally, we work with a lot of peoples, and every day there might be little dramas in the properties, or there's people fighting about who took whose parking, or their guests took their parking space, or it's little things like that, or the new tenants in the property are making a lot of noise, so the neighbors are angry and they want us to intervene. So we have to and make everyone be more calm and try to solve the situation because that's basically my job. I deal
So
with little dramas every day.
I love that. You're the drama police, okay?
Yeah.
But when we think about it, drama occurs on a continuum, and my cousin and I have really tried to discern when it's a problem and when it's not a problem. Okay, so the way people drive, it's so funny. I used to use this example. You're driving to work, you come into work, and you're mad because somebody cut you off in traffic, and don't people know how to drive? And so that's happening, and maybe you had a bad experience with a driver, and so the person telling the story go, yeah, they shouldn't do it, but at the same time, it's like it's this one little thing that happens all day long. And then we get into this other area that we're talking about, and that is what happens when we think about the story that's being told, and how do we coach to it. Okay, so now we're going to get back into the drama that is occurring, and it's keeping the person in the workplace, or I really think about it more from a workplace perspective. It's keeping someone from being the best version of themselves. And so where are they in terms of engaging in that drama? Okay, so thank you for spending some time with each other and sharing some ideas. This is great. So now let's go into the narrative. Okay, so now we've got the story. So what does the story look like? We tell stories all the time because they explain how and why things happen in our lives. And so the story becomes connected to the gap between what we want our life to be and what our life is. And the more we tell the story, whether we're coming from a total victim or we're just mad at some driver, the more it becomes our reality. Negative habits that persist in your life invariably come with a story. So why you can't stop the negative habit can sometimes come with a story. What does that mean? And storytelling drives the way we gather and spend our energy. So we build the story up so we can talk to people. It's a way for us to express that emotional hit we just had. So when we tell our stories and when we're working with team members and clients, we have to differentiate between what is a myth, what is a fact. Maybe we're going to go back and talk about meaning making from a culture, from a belief, from an expectation. What does that look like for someone? So the counterfacts. Sean Aker talks about counterfacts. And so now we're talking about facts we make up. Facts that aren't real, but we decide they're facts because they help our story. So in order for our story to be big, we have to dump a lot of stuff in our story. So what does it mean to be dumping all that stuff in our story? We have to exaggerate it. And so sometimes in our exaggeration, we do a little bit with counterfacts. And then the explanatory style. When we start explaining our story from a victim perspective, we can't change it. Many of you who've been in my classes have heard me say, if the furniture is not in your house, you can't move it. So what piece of the story you're telling can you make change with? Otherwise, you will always be the victim because you're not looking at what part of it you can own and what part of it you can change. And Sean Aker in Happiness Advantage says virtually all avenues of success are dictated by our explanatory style. So then we think about, okay, if that's the next part, that we think about the victim cycle. And I have so much compassion and grace for the victim, okay? Because what happens in the victim cycle is the person feels powerless. They don't feel like they have a way out of the cycle. They ignore their accountability. It's not my job, or I didn't do anything wrong. Or, then we get into blaming others. So not only blaming our thoughts, but blaming others. Well, if they wouldn't do this, I wouldn't react that way. We have a confusion as a reason for an action. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in this victim cycle, and waiting for somebody else to change is waiting for a miracle. So in order for people to get out of the victim story, they cannot wait for somebody else to be different. They have to figure out what they want to do on how they can be different. So now we come to the big part, giving it away. Why do we give it away? Because we can't sit with it anymore. It's too big. It's driving us crazy. We have to talk to somebody. And the people we're going to go talk to are people that agree with us, because we want to know if we're crazy or not. So we go talk to people that would say, no, I would get upset about the same thing. I would react the same way you're reacting to. And so when you have clients or teammates or any team members coming to you to give it away, you have to think about how you want to accept it. And so in many cases, the victim sends it to the receiver so they can talk about the persecutor. So now we come back to the drama cycle that was original. So now we're back in the victim cycle. What do we need to do? So we have the victim story. We have the rescuer. So now as coaches, we become the rescuer. That is not where we want to position ourselves as coaches. We want to think about how can we find a little space for creating change for the person that's telling us the story. If we don't do that, then we become dependent, and they keep coming to our coaching, and they keep coming to our leading, and they keep coming to talk to us in a form of dependency because they want to give you the story. It's in our thinking that if we give it away, it won't be part of us anymore. But the weird part is it stays with us. And so it can build some emotional contagion as well, especially if we're talking about a work-related drama, because the person they're talking about does that to you as well. Or maybe it's a power over kind of initiative, and how you feel about power is how they feel about power. And now you're hooked because you're having that experience in your head, not the experience they're having, but you're recreating your own experience with the emotional contagion that they're bringing to the conversation. And after a while, the people that we are sharing our victim stories with get burnt out. Coaches get burnt out. Therapists get burnt out. Leaders get burnt out because we've heard the story and there's no change. So how do we help the person so we don't get to the point of burning out? And now the next rescuer shows up. So a new coach, a new therapist, a new person to share the story with, and the cycle keeps going. Now, what's interesting is in giving it away, if the receiver is hooked enough, then the receiver has to go give it to somebody else as well. And so now we have to say, do you know what Bill did to Joe? Because now I'm feeling like that was really bad what happened to Joe. So now I got to go tell somebody. And that's the water cooler process that goes on in many organizations. It doesn't stay between the two people that it happened between. The meaning is made, it's given as a story to somebody else, and now we repeat the story again. And it has legs, it becomes the legend, it becomes truth, whether it is a story that has been evaluated or whether it's just somebody wanting to share gossip in an organization. So it's interesting, we did a survey, and these are the kinds of things. People don't like drama. People don't want to engage in it at the workplace. People talk about how difficult it is for them. And so when we ask people to say, what is drama? Things like making a fuss about something that's exaggerated and often designed to make the individual the center of attention and take attention away from possibly an issue they have. Emotional dramas, it involves individuals who think everything's about them. So there's this attention, there's this exaggeration, there's this triggering. So you can see in these statements, these are statements from a survey that we did. The desire for attention, unhinged, selfish people. You can see the reaction that people were having when they were describing what emotional drama is. Intensity, urgency, neediness, individuals who are overwhelmed or things aren't going their way, or they're trying to manipulate others. And I'm not sure they're manipulating intentionally. I think it's because they have faulty meaning. Things are going on in that cognitive process. And so as they tell the story, they have to make the story bigger so they can be a true victim. And so you can see that the people who are receiving the drama are not happy with it. Okay, so that's enough of that. We know what's happening. We know the cycle. What are we going to do about it as coaches? How are we going to, and leaders, how are we going to intervene? So first of all, we've got to think about intervening at the thought level. Okay, and one of my favorite authors is Byron Katie. This comes from Byron Katie's book, The Work. And is it true? Okay, so I worked in a really large organization, and we taught our leaders to go through the process of, is it true? Is it really true? So is it true? The thought you're thinking, the experience you just had, is it true? And can you absolutely know that it's true? So somebody comes to you and says, I think, you know, my boss is mad at me because when my boss came into work today, he walked by my desk and didn't say anything to me. So obviously he's mad at me. I must have done something. Can you absolutely know that's true? That's your experience, but is it true? And so now we're mind reading. Remember, we go back to the cognitive processes. We're mind reading what's in that person's mind. It's not that they were late coming in and they had a really big meeting they had to prepare for. It's not some other explanation. It's only the explanation I'm giving it. So can you absolutely know that's true? More importantly, question 3, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? So what's going on for you if you believe it to be true? Does it bring stress into your life? What images do you see? So now we start thinking about how is it connected to the past and how is it building your future? And when you think about and you see and you witness those things, what emotions arise? Name 2 or 3 emotions that you're feeling as a result of that thought. And now, how do you treat that person when you believe that thought? How do you treat other people and yourself? So if you think that, you know, in an interaction earlier, the person was rude, how are you going to treat that person as a response to how they were rude? If you feel like revenge is the way to deal with it. So we see this happening in a work environment where we can really start to distill. Byron Katie has a 4-stage that I like to use as well. And is it true? Is it really true? And the leaders in our organization used to ask, and it became, you know, the question, is it really true, without questioning the person from a judgment perspective? Is it really true? And then the next 2 questions followed were, how do you feel when you think it's true? And how would you feel if you didn't think it was true? So now you start questioning the feelings you're having about the thought. So I love these 2 statements because I think it's really important that we have to accept what is and move forward. And so helping a person see the one thing that people cannot take from you is how you respond. Is this the way you want to respond? And again, the magic wand question, if you had a magic wand, how would you respond differently? And I really love the next statement because it really helps us understand that when we're tolerant, it doesn't mean we agree with the person. It means they have the right to believe what they're believing. If they can't stand in their own right to believe what they're believing, they're not going to be able to move forward. So as coaches, we have to accept what is in order to help our team and our team members and our clients move forward. So how do we get unhooked? Okay, now we're hooked emotionally. How do we get unhooked? We show up, we have self-compassion. We realize we're hooked. What do we want to do? We're hooked, we're emotionally hooked. How do we can journal, we can exercise. When I talked earlier about the cortisol and the adrenaline, that's yucky chemicals going through your body. So even a walk around the block can sometimes give you some distance from what's going on. Stepping out, being mindful when it happens, okay? The best plan is, if it's happening now, what do I want to do tomorrow when it happens? So building plans for the future, but being mindful of when it happens, you know, what's the environment? Who are you with? You know, what's the bucket it's going into? What do you want to do with the bucket? Knowing what really matters, knowing your values, what's important to you. Is it more important to help build this relationship, or are you trying to think about what needs to happen next in terms of backing out for your why? What's your why? Why do you do the work you do? If you're thinking that your boss is mad at you, are your values for collaboration and to talk? Are your values for integrity and to go, you know, question what's going on so you can have a different perspective? And then finally, letting go. And when I think about those two words together, nobody's really taught us how to let go. It's something we tell people all the time they have to let go of. So how do we let go? And in her book, Emotional Agility, Susan David talks about tiny tweaks. What's one little thing you can do in the process of letting go? Because remember, much of what's going on for your team member or your client is hardwired into their brain. So they have to think about, once we have the awareness, and it's okay for us to have that thought, it's okay for us to have that feeling, how do we start letting it go and move on to other areas? So Sean Aker says, we have to realize that we create our reality. So we have finding opportunities to pounce on. We have potential. Who do I want to be? What is my potential? What is the best version of me? And is that showing up? We see that negative things are happening, yet we can do something about them. I can only own the piece of the issue that belongs to me. But once I own it, it releases the tension between me and the person I have the issue with. And Sean also says realism about the present. This is happening, but what do I want in the future? Yes, it is happening to me in the now, but what does it mean for me to go forward in the future? So we've all seen this one, but this is where we can go into that belief part of the thought and the meaning making. Okay, what's the adversity I'm facing? What is the belief I have about the adversity? What is the consequence of believing what I'm believing? And am I ready to let go? Can I dispute it? Can I change my thinking? Can I move it 1 degree? I'm listening to a Martha Beck book right now on integrity. It's really good. And she's talking about, can I move what's happening 1 degree? All of us want our lives to change 180 degrees when something is uncomfortable. But what does 1 degree look like? What's one simple tweak so that we're disputing the noise that's going on? Control the self-talk. Self-talk is ongoing. It creates our future, and our brain interprets self-talk as real. Our brain does not know how to discern that it's not true. So when you start saying negative things about yourself, it's going into a belief about yourself. So we want to really control what we're saying about ourselves. The higher the stress, the more likely we're beating up on ourselves, and we do not argue with ourselves. I want you to think for a moment, maybe something you said that was negative to yourself over the last 7 days. And when you said it to yourself, did you go, that's not true? No, you went, yeah, that's basically true. You know, whatever it is, I'm not enough, or I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done more, or whatever. And we don't argue with ourselves when we say negative things to ourselves. We would not let another human being say some of the things that we say to ourselves. So we've got to really control our self-talk through awareness that it's happening, through challenging when it's negative, through thinking about how could I reframe that into a positive affirmation, and have compassion for, you know, doing the best that you can do at the given moment. That's very Gestalt. It's what I believe. People do the very best they can at any given moment. And I don't care if they're doing better yesterday. They're doing the best they can at any given moment. So how do we help them integrate what they had, you know, they advanced to a certain level, maybe they've had some backtracking, you know, self-compassion for it. We're all on a journey, and integrating that journey into where we're going next. Then control noise. Noise really has an impact on what we're experiencing, particularly in that thought and event, that noise. So do a 5% experiment. Where does noise come from in your life? And try to eliminate 5% of it. That could be talk shows, that could be other people, that could be, news, whatever it is. Do a 5% experiment and reduce it, and create active noise canceling. I'm not going to listen to that. Fact check what is coming in from a noise perspective. If you want to, think about writing it out when the noise is impacting you to keep yourself from giving it away. Writing it out can be another way to control the story. And exercise. I can't say enough about exercise because it gets those yucky hormones or yucky things that we just created. I guess they are hormones that we created and are running through our bodies. And then my favorite guy now is Mark Brackett. So Mark Brackett has given us another way to look at emotional intelligence, which is recognize our feelings, what's really going on, and understand where they're coming from. Why is this happening to me? And then label it effectively, okay? So not every emotion is sadness. Not every emotion is anger. There are 100 of them. You're going to see them in just a moment. So we're labeling accurately, and then we decide how we want to express. It doesn't just happen. We think about how we want to express. So we recognize, okay, it's happening again. I always get upset when my boss gives me that look. I always get upset when I'm in a meeting with that colleague and she says, I know what the boss wants us to do. So labeling our emotions correctly and then saying, is this the time to say something or not? But more importantly, we think about the next time. We start making plans for the next time. So when that thing shows up, we're ready to address it because we know where we want to go with it. So this is Mark Brackett's mood meter. I love this. And there's some folks on the call that use this every day at a school that they are working within. And they ask the students to say, where are you on this schedule? And one of the people on the call had to quit asking students what color they were because they picked the color they liked rather than the emotion that the color was expressing. These were 7-year-olds, right? But think about it. How often do you think that you're chill? How often do you think you're mellow? We think about being tense, we think about restless, we think about nervous, we think about irritated, but how often are you satisfied and content? How often are you enthusiastic and optimistic? We think about the blue and the red more than we think about the yellow and the green. So how do we help people name those other emotions that can take us, 1% towards a different way of feeling and a different way of expressing? Okay, we've got 2 minutes for questions. Okay, Ala.
I have a question, but are the mood and the feeling are the same, or it has some difference? Because like you said, that most of the people, they are in the yellow, or like they barely think about yellow and green. But can the feeling and the mood are like, so the question is, are the feeling and the mood are the same, or they have some difference, especially when we talk about the drama, like detaching from drama
I think
and evaluating.
So Ala, I think the feeling puts us in a mood. Okay. I think the feeling leads to a mood. I don't think the moods are as big as the feelings we're having. So the purpose of looking at all those 100 emotions is to really name it, label it correctly, and then express it in a way that it doesn't create consequences for us, so that we can then live into a different mood, or think about, do I want to have a different feeling? If I had a choice of feelings in the yellow, what am I feeling? If I had a range of choices in the blue, what am I feeling? And so I think that what Brackett is trying to do is name it and then make decisions using the ruler. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I know we're coming up to the end. We are at the end. So if you have a question, you didn't get it answered, please reach out to me. You can just send it to Dr. Peggy at globalioc.com. And I'll be happy to respond to your questions. What I wanted to end with is we have webinars coming up on April 3rd. We have Zelda and I talking about eclectic coaching, which is the third generation of coaching. We have somebody coming to talk about building their internal coaching culture, and she was the person who built it. And then we have Annie coming in June talking about researching your own coaching practice. We've got a blog. Please go to Global IOC. There's so much information and resources out there in blogs, in communities of practice. We have every past webinar that we've ever done. There's some thought leadership and events out there. And we have a coaching essentials class coming up on March 14th. We've broken all the coaching essentials down into 6 separate modules. On the 14th, we're talking about connecting. And then we are doing DISC values training on April 1st. So whether this applies to you or somebody else, please feel free to pass the information along. I am so grateful to
where we can see this record with this presentation of this webinar.
It'll be at globalioc.com. The red right there. So
Thank you.
anything you want is at globalioc.com. So thank you for joining me today. It's been wonderful. I'm so glad that we had connections all over the world. That just makes my heart sing. So have a good rest of your week. For those of you that stayed late, have a good dinner. Thank you.